for some of you, this is the first time you've been with Jan and I with doing a Zoom training. So this will be a lecture. And then at the end, I'll take some questions. Then we'll take a little break, 5 minutes, come back, do a little bit more. So Jan, if you can pull up the new chart. I'm going to work from that, and if you were able to print it off, and you have that there in front of you as well, but it'll be up here. And I'm going to review some things and that you're familiar with. So my experience with re-listening to things or being reminded of things is it's always helpful. So I hope that this will be true on this part as well. So for some of you, when you got the email with this training for today and my brief, it's 24 minutes, this will expand that a little bit and just give you the idea, especially for those of you that this is going to be the first time that you're going to hear us talk about this. As I said before the break, that we initially taught from the overview of developmental immaturity, which was the chart that Pia developed many years ago at the Meadows. And that what we've done now over this last couple of years is develop this in this way for a lot of different reasons. Some of them is to update it, to make the language more user-friendly. And as some of you know, as we've talked about this, is that Pia's original chart could be confusing for people. So I'm hoping that as I go through this with you and you're listening to this, and if you come from a background from years ago of training with us, I'm going to refer to a couple of different things. And then, like I said, hopefully this will be helpful for you if you choose to transition to this chart as well. So the first thing I'm going to remind you of as we go through this is that this is a polarities model, that we think of this as moderation. Core issue number 5 is the idea of where we all land on this continuum. So as we talk through this, and as I'm teaching this right now, I want to encourage you that part of what we believe at the Institute is that we are teachers, that every one of you is in this role, which is cognitive behavioral. It is helping people understand their story, teaching them these principles, and then there are all the other elements that we incorporate into our work. But that as we begin this time together is, so I want you to think about that, and I'm reminding you of that we come from a polarities model, and that we're all wounded healers. This is one thing that we emphasize. That's why you do your own work. We humbly come into the space with those we work with. And I know that all of you, because of this, have an awareness of that. But I just think that's one of the most powerful things as we work with people is understanding that I am not better than, nor am I less than. I am here in the space out of my healing, my journey, as I sit with another person. And that is incredibly powerful. We know that. All of you are psychotherapists. Again, psycho is soul and therapist is healing. So I do believe, and a couple of you talked about that all of us, whatever your spiritual path is, that you are soul healers. As I said already, we're teachers, we are coaches, and ultimately, as people work on the core areas to practice and the 5 components that Jan is going to talk about later this afternoon, is that we are consultants with people. So that as we go through this, I want you to think about your own practice, the way that you're working with people. And I want to remind you that part of this is teaching this overview chart. In reading some different studies, I also found one from Janina Fisher, where she talked about a research study that followed people in a psychoeducational model for 1 year and talked about how, as they understood their parts, it was structural disassociation model. If you're familiar with Janina's work, she talks about that. But how that in working with people, introducing them to a psychoeducation following their model and working with parts, that people improved after a year of this type of work. Some of our folks who come and see us are not able to stay with us for that long of time. And so that we believe that, whatever the time we have with people is going to be beneficial. So I say all that just to remind you as you go into this, that this is exciting, I think, is that this part of our work. And that if you remember, for those of you that work with our previous chart, that column 1 was the nature of the child. And so we still believe that this is the nature of a child, and that it is through the experiences growing up in the family. The way that Pia titled that was that childhood trauma causes, with that arrow across. So we've eliminated some of that. And as I go through, I'm going to kind of remind you, for those of you that have been with us a long time, for those of you that are new to the training the last couple of years, that overview, the idea of it is that these are things within children. What we've decided, and I am really proud of this, is that actually, and I say that this gives this just a little more oomph, is that the column 1 on the left-hand side of this are actually the birthrights of a child. So this would be one of the things, and I'll note as we go through, the languaging is a little bit different. And what I really believe, and in spending time in developing this, is that as it states in the 14th Amendment, that, and it talks about birthrights, is that these are inalienable rights. That just as we work with people, and that's us as the therapist working with people as the teacher, is that we help people to understand this is what you deserved, period. And that's where that umph comes in. And so as we stand with that, it gives it, I believe, an opportunity for us to working with people, and as they talk through column 1. Jan and I developed a Likert scale that is in her book. That is a great resource that you can give that has these in it. And attachment is new. And I forget, Jan, we hadn't developed that yet, have we?
Not in the book, but I think, let me check the latest update. We put it in our latest update for our manuals.
Yeah, I knew that it wasn't in the book. So if you possibly can put that in the chat, then people could add that 6th core issue. But the idea of this is that, and this is the way that I teach this, and this is how I encourage you, is that growing up in your family, whether you have the assessment, which is awesome, and that's the questions that it asks, is that with each one of these core issues. So with this left-hand column, I'm going to teach this a little different than the way that we have taught that before, but I'm going to talk about the captions at the top, because Jan and I have worked on creating these together. So the birthrights of a child, and that is really column 1, is the assessment of the impact of growing up in your family. Where we've really made a transition is in presenting issues today. That, this idea of when birthrights are not met, as an adult, this is how people show up in our offices. And I'm going to talk about that in detail with each one of these, but this is what you're paying attention to. So you're getting an assessment. That's the left column. You're understanding the impact on, this person growing up in the family system. In the second column, you're looking at the impact today, how this does show up in people's lives. The third column, which again is something that Jan has emphasized, that we talk about, which is, I think I call column 3, the green column, hope, because these are the core areas to practice. So that as I work on my trauma in the Greek is wound, and again, thinking about wounding in that definition, that as I experience this through the Healing Our Core Issues therapist with the DART processes, that these are the things that I can measure. Again, this is a part of your treatment plan. And so if you are an insurance-based person, that third column very much you can work on in the goals that you are establishing for individuals. And that would be combined with what Jan's going to talk about here a little bit later. So with column 1, value, the essence of this work, and for those of you that remember this from me, is I have a lot of interest in this idea and had studied the concept of self-esteem. So even though the word, and so I'm going to go across with self-esteem, the idea of this is that in our culture, the way that we measure this sense of self, that you have value, is in performance-based self-esteem. So this is familiar to you, but I'm just reminding you how well I do. Attribute-based self-esteem, what I have, my attributes, mine, or as we talk about, our possessions, including our children, those things that give us esteem, or other-based self-esteem. My value is linked to what you think of me. And again, in that original language, this is the definition of codependence. My sense of self is based in you. When I heard Pia lecture and talk about this, she was the first person that I'd ever heard say that the truth is, and this is a spiritual principle, is that we all have value just because we are here on this planet. And that was revolutionary to me. It's generated from the inside out. And that's why I say, when I say that you're going to be doing cognitive therapy with people, is that that's the truth. And for many people that come and see us out of their wounding, they don't have a sense of value, of being precious, of being worth it. And you can fill in that blank. It's all externally based. And so I believe our work begins here with beginning to get people to understand through growing up in my family, did I feel that value? Talking about that, you educating them on what that really means, understanding the ways that people gain value, and then working with them. Oh, thanks, Jan.
I just wanted to, I'm sorry, I wanted to see if we had it actually. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. And because Jan is going to be able to put that in the chat, great resource for you. And a lot of people, I think a couple people in this group actually give that as a part of their assessment package, because this is much less invasive than the DART assessment. And so that this is an additional resource, or you can just talk about it with people. That's part of the work. And the idea of that is that they begin to develop that new neural pathway, that new belief. And that usually takes, for most people I've seen, a minimum of 1 to 2 years. Again, if you have that luxury of working with people, but that's where I think of all this work is seed planting, is that we're able to give people this. But that is pivotal for people. And that then, how does this come to your office as your clients begin to come in and you begin to get to know them and what they're doing? And so this is the idea. And Jan, if you can take the board down just for a second so people can see me. I want to do this with people. I want to remind them of this. So if you want to click on to gallery view for just a second, as individuals. So the idea of this is that as you're working with people and they're coming in and you're listening to them, that as they're talking, most of us struggle in this way, is that we tend to default to one of these two areas. And again, think of this polarity. It's not a hard fixed thing, but if we are here, this is health. This is, and I'm going to be very careful with this because people make fun of this, but this is how I would want you to teach people is, and Terry Real talks about this as well, and using his own language, but that we, humanity, are all here in this same as, S-A-M-E, as position. I am not better than you. Anytime we go into judgment, and all of you, that would be a takeaway from today. Keep your eye on that, because it'll happen before the day is over, where you will go into judgment. We're in the one-up position. We are not practicing mindfulness. We are not here in this space in conscious awareness. We're in the one-up position. For many of us, we default to the one-down position, which is that shame core, that idea of I am less than. And that's a lie. It's not true. My gifts don't make me better than, and my challenges don't make me less than. That's where this same as position. And so as people are coming into your office, and of course, grandiosity and narcissism and overt and covert, but shame is just as powerful, and those kind of things that coming into the office. And so that's where, as Jan and I are saying that, and we're paying attention to the core issues, then that's where we're looking at that with people and saying, okay, where does this person land in this regard? And that we're really trying to understand that. Sorry, I wrote out my notes, so I want to make sure that I hit everything with that. So the work, and then Jan, thank you. You can put up the chart again. Is I love this, and again, I give Jan credit for the core areas to practice. Is this idea of this, but we have enhanced that. So embedded within value and the shame, one up, one down, and all of that is all the understanding that all of you have about, as Pia said, the core issue of self-esteem, less than and better than. Now, what we're saying very clearly is, here's the good news. Here's the way that you can treat this. We use clinical language that treat this, the idea of loving the self. So all of these, as you'll notice as we go through these, is that holding myself with compassionate awareness. That's our mindfulness practice. Esteeming myself from within. You're going to have to teach your clients what this looks like. This is what I call appropriate self-disclosure, is that you've all worked on this and that you're telling people, because you'll get into, as I say, you don't want to, but the idea of this with people. And part of our work is with that grandiose / narcissistic person. We want to help them understand, that's the one up. Breathe down. And we're working with them in that regard with no shame, but we just want them relationally, because all these are about being in relationship with the self and others. And then again, same with shame. You can't be in the same as position. You can't hold yourself. Lori, I love that you said this. This was a definition that I would have given all of you in level 1. My definition of self-esteem, which is something I just kind of integrated from a couple of things that sound very familiar, but I'm going to say it again. Holding myself with warm, positive regard, in spite of my limitations and flaws. I am enough. Brene Brown's work. I matter. Again, I'll take credit. I said this before Brene, but not that I'm going into the one up, but that's a part of Brene's awesome work. And that's ours. So I love, Lori, when you said that this morning, because I knew I was going to again remind people of that definition. So let me say that again. Holding myself in warm, positive regard, in spite of my limitations and flaws. I am enough and I matter. And because I am old school, I still have 3x5 cards. I'll hand those out to people and I'll say, I want you to write this down and I want you to commit this to memory, because this is the beginning of esteeming the self from within. What Jan and I have added to this, which is really has been something I've spent some time with, and you can tell that Jan and I both have, is this idea of self-compassion. That is now a part of, in column 3, in regard to this, is that it is really important for us to teach our clients about this concept. One of the things I heard Rick Hansen said, and Jan talked about this beforehand, but they've done research in the body scans, and just by taking your right hand, I guess, yeah, your right hand, even if you're left-handed, putting it over your heart, that actually settles the nervous system and brings you into this concept of self-compassion. And I do that a lot with my clients. I say, as we're working on this, and I try to model that and encourage them. That's where our coaching comes in, is that we're coaching them in this way of being compassionate towards self. And a lot of my clients, and I'll use my humor with them, and I'll say, this is your challenge. But what is this idea of self-compassion? It isn't just self-pity. It's simply warmth. I love this. This is a definition I got from Rick Hansen. I'm going to give you a Rick Hansen quote and then a Kristen Neff, who is also the guru. If you want to look at somebody that has spent her career with this, is Kristen Neff, Neff, but is warmth, concern, and good wishes. Isn't that great? I try to keep things simple. Pia was a great model of that. But this idea of warmth for myself, concern, and good wishes. So if you're in a mindfulness practice, they talk about this a lot. Pema Chandran said that the root of compassion is compassion for oneself. And of course, again, most of you are familiar with her work, but this idea of we have to have compassion for ourselves. This is something I've really been thinking about a lot recently. We have to have compassion for ourselves to truly have compassion for others. Some research around that, and then I'm going to move on to core issue 2.
Rick,
yes.
Can I add one thing to that
Please.
definition?
Jump
It's
right
just
in there.
something that I think really helps in what we talk about in our chart, is when you're talking about self-esteem, is after you say what Rick has said, I always say my weaknesses define that I'm not less than others, and my gifts define me as not being better than others. They just define being human. And we talk about humanity in a reality, is that, that's key, is that we're human. And so embracing our weaknesses as not less than, and our gifts not as better than.
Yeah, and jump in there in time, Jen, because I was going to say anything else that you would add, is that, I love that, thank you, is that just it's encouraging as you work with people, is that studies have shown that self-compassion has many benefits, and we know that. We could just pause right with that and do a self-compassionate, but it actually reduces self-criticism. Again, that's part of the core issue 1, especially for people that live a lot in the one down position. It lowers stress hormones like cortisol. So the more we're able to practice, it makes sense, doesn't it? As we think about this act of kindness toward ourselves, many of us have the most critical voice of anyone who will ever be in relationship with us, is our own inner dialogue, our self-talk. So it really does reduce stress hormones, increases self-soothing, attachment, self-encouragement, and other aspects of resilience. So actually, when we practice self-compassion, we are able to deepen our resilience, which is important for all of us, and of course with our clients. and then helping to heal any challenges of our childhood trauma. So this was a study, and this was in the book One by Rick Hansen. So I just pulled that from there. So again, Kristen Neff, Rick Hansen, a lot of people have done work around this. And again, thank you, Jan. I wanted to spend some time with that one because, again, I just wanted to remind all of you that in the essence of our work, and these are 6 different things. When Pia initially taught this, and the whiteboard that many of you have that, they had numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I still call them core issue 1. So this is core issue 1, and I'm going to say core issue 2. And it's funny, Michelle, I heard you say that. I appreciated that because that is how I teach it. And I have the board, this board, blown up. Delaney, I got it at Office Depot in Westchester, so right down the street from you. And that I have that in my office, and I always am referring to it. For sure when I'm doing a psychoed piece, but also it's just something that reminds my clients. I know many of you have the board, again, that from the previous with the 4 columns and in color. Some of you have the board with the 3 columns that we transitioned to over the last couple of years. And that's why I said this is the most updated one. But as I teach this, I'll say that's core issue 1, that's value. Core issue 2, even though there's not a number there, they just kind of go like that in order, is vulnerability. This one I'm gonna, because you're familiar with this, I'm not gonna spend as much time with this one as a couple of the others because of the things that we're doing today, but is that you all know, again, the birthright, growing up in your family, this is the inferred embedded part, is that you were vulnerable and you needed to be protected. And as we talk to people about this, this is so important for us. And this will definitely be my fire hose for you. I'm trying to pace myself, but is the idea of the areas that we look at abuse is that impact on us that was a wounding in our life, and that you were vulnerable and needed to be protected. So I teach people, I talk about this in this way, and that many people growing up in their families, and again, thinking of this continuum, experienced verbal abuse. That the words that were spoken, there are 2 types of verbal abuse. There's the emotional abuse. What's wrong with you? That kind of language related to emotion, the shaming language. There is mental abuse. That was the idea of questioning your reality. You know, what's happening? I always use the example of the adult child of the alcoholic. You know, it's growing up in this family system, and it's like this, and it's like that. I see this, and then it's like, no, it's not really like that. So again, emotional and mental abuse that happens, questioning of our self. And then one I've added is, and is so powerful, and this has been recently, another type of verbal abuse is non-verbal abuse, silence. And so a lot of times people will say, no, I didn't have any of that. But when my mom got mad, she wouldn't talk to me for days. And some of you have had those clients. And so it's like that, again, Greek, trauma is wound. So the idea of that's a wounding. Mom, why won't you talk to me? Oh, I'm not that smart. Oh, I guess that's not real. Oh, I was shamed. All of that. Physical abuse, sexual abuse, spiritual abuse. And for a lot of you, Connie was talking about being a Christian counselor, and part of her work, the idea of that working with people growing up in their family system and beliefs around that. legalism and in different doctrines of different churches, theology, a lot of work around that. So helping people that they were a child, they were vulnerable, those messages they received. And then neglect, that's the last one. And I think Tansy talked about that book that Jan and I recommend, Running on Empty, so good, Jonas Webb's work. And neglect is a whole category of people. Working with people, that's the most challenging to help people to understand the impact on them. You were vulnerable, you were a child, you needed to be protected, and that these are the things that you did and didn't get. So that's our assessment. It's one of those questions, and the expansive nature of that. Now, this is our boundary system. Again, this is where I'm going to just say that the way that we now look at that and encourage you to look at this as clients come into your office is porous or boundaryless. You know that, again, that imagery of that where there is no protection and everything comes in. And when you're working with people and you're going to begin to, that's where our psychoeducation, and we begin to teach people the boundary system. Or they're an individual that out of their story that they are impenetrable, which is not relational, that they have walls that come up for them, and that they the relationships that they're in, that they don't give much out. So because of your teaching, or because of your being with us in the teachings before and the understanding of that, I'm going to move on to the protecting the self. Again, the core area to practice. And this is where you work with people in helping them to use functional boundaries. So again, what I would say is that all of you are familiar with that. But Jan, if you could again take the board down, this will be the last time I'll have you do that for this one. I just want to remind all of you of this. Some of you have been with us a long time. For some of you, it's more new, things like that. But you're familiar with this, is that this, I just want to remind you, and I want you to teach your clients this. This is transformative for people as they begin to look at it. That is your external, and I've integrated Pia's language, Terry Reel's language. You use your language if you have something else. But this is your listening protective boundary. I add both those and interchange those. Jan does it a little bit different. That's okay. You find what works for you, but I think this is protecting me. I am listening to this individual over here, and that I have to have my boundary. So again, the porous, boundaryless, everything coming in, you know that, or I have that wall. I can't listen to you. I can't be in relationship with you. And so that I have to really work on that. So depending on the individual, and I want to encourage you, you maybe already do this, but this is so important as you teach clients about this relational element. And then again, your containing, speaking boundary. This is your inside. And the idea, if you're boundaryless and you don't have a filter and everything goes out, it's hard to be in relationship. And we know all the components and trauma that factors into that. And if I am behind a wall, there is nothing coming out. And so the idea of that, where with the skill to practice, and that's again, where we're a coach, is we're working with people and we're helping them to get this balance. And what I say to people, and then Jan, any thoughts on boundaries that you want to add, is that that we have to have a boundary system. And this is about us protecting ourselves and in protecting us from the world. And so, again, these are concepts you're familiar with, but I'm just encouraging you with this, is that this is the core issue to practice. And that's why it's protecting the self, externally and internally. Thank you, Jan. If you could bring the board back up. Core issue 3. The birthright of the child. We deserve to grow up to know that we're human. What does that mean? That means that we're all imperfect. Again, one of those things that I'm reminding you of with this, and within the assessment, you really want to listen to this as people talk to you, as they talk about their life, because this is the formation. This is something Jan and I have been talking about recently and really emphasizing in trainings, is that core issue 3, and I don't think I really understood this in this way before, but this is where our adapted parts get set into motion. This is the expectation growing up in our family about what the world looks like. And so we as children, vulnerable, begin to decide young in an unconscious way. And then as we begin to develop as, from 6 forward, then how to be safe in this world, how to be interactive, how to be authentic. In listening to Gabor Mate's work, which I really has been another teacher for me, he talks about attachment, which is our 6th core issue, and the experience growing up in our family really leads to our authentic self and our, struggle with that. So in the Greek, authentic is actually author. So the idea of you being the author of your story. So I'm saying that to all of you right now, but then as you work with your clients, I really love that. I'd not heard that before, the definition from the Greek. But writing your story, we talk about getting your story straight. In core issue 3, helping people to understand that growing up, and this is what is presenting in our offices then. So we're teaching them the assessment, getting an idea of that growing up in their family. And then how do people show up in your office? And this one, especially, I think of polarities. And we've changed the language just a little bit for a lot of reasons. But the person that shows up, thinking of the polarity in your office, who is good and perfect. And I was just talking to somebody yesterday, actually, in the office about this, his good and perfect tendencies that can border on OCD type of behavior. But this idea of perfectionism, that the expectation in my family was that I have to be this way, versus the chaotic family. So where Pia talked about it as being bad and rebellious. For those of you that may have the board in your office and you glance over there at that. Yes, when we're struggling, sometimes we become the best at being bad. We take that on, that we're rebellious. But I honestly believe that the language that Jan and I are using is more trauma informed. I really believe that. The idea of the acting out, growing up in my chaotic family system where there was no boundaries, that I had the alcoholic parent or whatever that chaos in the family system looked like, that's the expectation in the family, is that it's just chronic like that. And so I take it into myself, and this is the formation of my parts. This is the adapted self. And, we look at that, the youngest part of it, like we're talking about implicit memory, the wounded child, then that adapted, we think of it as like that elementary age, that teenage part. We talk a lot about that. And then now I add the young adult part. That would be a new one, is that 18 to 24 continues on. But, sometimes that development in there is really important, and the brain is still myelinating, so that we're spending time understanding all of that, the story of each one of us. And am I in my healthy adult self, or am I in a part of myself? Because we say we seamlessly move into these parts, and that's where our mindfulness comes in. So knowing the self in core issue 3, as we work with people, again, encouraging them to be mindful, attuned, to have understood their story so that they can own their reality. And practice then when they get triggered, they move into their reactivity, that they're able to quicker pull out of that and come back into their healthy adult self, and to be able to be present in that. And that's what I always say to people is that we're all going to have this happen. What I encourage people and try to practice myself is that I am aware of it. Boy, I feel like my 10-year-old self. I want to just go into denial. Oh, I want to go into my 15-year-old self and I want to self-soothe through eating. Oh, I don't know the answer to this computer question. My youngest wounding, 4 or 5, which I do have that memory of. I am overwhelmed, flooded, and disassociated. I just want to withdraw from it. So when I become attuned to these parts of myself, I'm able to then move back in and say, Rick, do you really need to eat that chocolate cupcake? No. What's happening right now? And if I want to eat it, fine. But it's more of a mindfulness as I move through that. Rick, you can face it. Whatever that is I want to go in denial about. I've got this. The adult man can answer this question I feel overwhelmed about. Jan, anything else about knowing the self or core issue 3?
No, I think that was the most important thing when I was writing my book. I remember talking to you about it and realized, where does that belong? And that's like an essential part to know parts, because there are historical selves. So that is part of our reality. So
Yeah.
thank you.
And that is in Jane's book again, and we emphasize that more than I think we did for some of you that were in the training years ago. Is just, this is that historical understanding of ourselves. So with core issue 4, the birthright, is that, and I'm always sensitive with this one, with understanding the world we live in, socioeconomic things, and there's a lot of research though about the disparity and all of that. But this one, as you can see, is that every child has needs and wants, and helping people to understand this relationally as you do this assessment, and all of this is in the dark, and you'll pick all of this up with all 6 of these. But especially as you think about needs and wants, and you're looking at that and dialoguing with people about like that, what I want you to think about with needs and wants is Maslow's hierarchy that you're all familiar with. That's part of what you're listening to in core issue 1, the basic needs of people, and the impact. And again, thinking of the polarities, if somebody grows up poor and has, from out of that was hungry and didn't, their basic needs weren't met for a variety of reasons, people have a lot of shame with that. And that's part of your work, is helping them to understand that you were a child and you grew up in this system. We're not blaming anybody, but we want to understand how that affects you. Same with abundance. I remember a client Janice shared with who grew up wealthy, but yet his emotional needs were not met. His psychological needs were not met. He had everything in the world, and yet, the suffering that he endured. And so that's the nuance of that. As you look at people and understand with Maslow's those basic needs, and then you move up the chart to love and belonging, ultimately the goal is that self-actualized self, which would be, of course, our core issue, our column 3, or with Jan talking about the functional adult. And we move in and out of that, but that's a worthy goal for us. That's really where that got set up. Now, relationally, how does that show up? The presenting issue today, and this is what we're looking at here, is as people are living their life, and again, this idea of anti-dependent. Now, let me give you this definition. It took me a while to really understand this, but anti-dependent is growing up in my family system, my needs and my wants, but especially my needs, were not met. So this is an adapted part, made a decision that I'm on my own. And therefore, even when I know there's a need there, I am not going to reach out. I am not going to ask others. That I'm going to default to this anti-dependent stance. So the simple definition of that, an anti-dependent is I, for whatever the reason, and that's where people need to get their story straight and understand is it is too risky to reach out or it won't be met. And so working with an anti-dependent, and for those of you that do couples work, and this work is so great to be able to have this dialogue with people and working with this, again, this idea of people in their stories, that anti-dependent person. And with all of these, of course, and I meant to say this earlier, and you all know this, each person is unique. I love the complexity of this and understanding it with each individual. We have these general ways of looking at things and then create the truth, the story of each individual. So then there are those who grew up in families where everything was done for them, that they felt like, and that's where learned helplessness comes from, and a lot of research around that, but that they feel like they can't do it themselves, that they are dependent on that other person. And that's where that continuum of understanding it, using myself as an example of that, is I have anti-dependent qualities and dependent. And that especially when I get overwhelmed and flooded, technology would be a big one of those. I've really grown every now and then when Jan and I are talking, I'll say, Jan, you'd be proud of me because I faced this. Like a couple of weeks ago, if any of you are Zoom people, Zoom really changed how you set up those sessions. And my knee-jerk response, again, dropping into my dependent self, was I can't do this on my own. I got to call Jan. I just got to. I made myself. This was my functional self. The healthy adult part of me was, and I hate this. Jan loves it. I fooled around for a couple of hours and I just dinked around and I figured it out. And so it was an opportunity for growth for me. Again, going over here to the next column, I was taking care of myself. I wasn't dependent on others. I could have if I couldn't have figured it out, but I needed to start with me. So that brings me to the middle. And then the same with anti-dependent. The last one, needless, wantless. Helping people understand, such a huge one for people to understand what are your needs, what are your wants, huge amount of growth, which then again leads me to column 3. This is one of the ways where, especially for those of you that use the other board that we have differentiated out, that this is taking care of the self. So this is the idea of self-care. So if you know that board and you have it memorized, this would be where that Pia combined these, and it was called interdependence. It was self-care and interdependence. We've pulled that out because we believe that attachment is really where we learned about how to be relationally and be interdependent. And so self-care stands on its own. And this is about taking care of the self and things like getting a massage. So that doing a pedicure, doing things that are nurturing to ourselves. It's very much that, but it's also this idea of this, the care of the self, that again, that I have got my back, no matter what's happening in the world. And this is my most challenging one personally, is to really be able to practice self-care. Jan's been a good mentor in this. She's encouraged me with this. And so for all of you, that's what I want to encourage is, how do you practice self-care? And this is very much a part of us working with our clients, is helping them to understand this, that self-care, again, that what is there is with my needs and wants, and both your needs and your wants matter. Number 5. Oh, Jan, anything you want to add to that one in self-care?
No.
Okay. The birthright, and this one I really, again, want to emphasize, of every child, is to grow up and to experience spontaneity. To be able to be spontaneous And out of children, and this starts with little babies, and again, this is where the attachment research also comes in, but is to experience joy. This idea of a child. So for those of you that are parents or grandparents and you can reflect back, or nieces and nephews, I have over the last year really thought about how important this one is, and really paying attention to this with clients. This idea of how they enjoy their lives, because especially since COVID, since March of 20, the anxiety we all experience, and all the stress wherever we landed, and all that over these last 3 years now. Literally, we're at 3 years of this, and that this is rooted in our family system. So in core issue 3, it's the expectation, what is expected. Core issue 5 is the experience, growing up in my family. What kind of family system did I live in? Was my family over controlled? Again, we've changed the language a bit, brought it to, I think, a more trauma informed, that idea of our parents out of their wounding parented us. It had this impact. But if we grew up in that rigid family that was uptight, and again, OCD, and there was a way to be in the world, and this is the way, that's that over controlled system. And then on that continuum, that family system that was out of control. So that's where in 3 is a bit separate from 5, but there's some overlap with this, that out of control sense, growing up in my family, or I had a really, over controlled mom and an out of control dad. Again, the nuance for every one of us. And as we are in our families, because of this idea of, if we're over controlled, we can't really, as our adult self, if we go into moderating the self, really experience spontaneity and joy. We just can't. I've been reading recently some interesting research on play, and how important it is for all of us to have things, and of course, I'm going to say that linked to growing up in our families, that were you allowed to play? Were you allowed to experience your life in all the ways? Or were you fearful? And how did that affect you? Again, if you're out of control, or your family was out of control, there too, you could not experience a spontaneous life. There wasn't a lot of joy. It was too scary. It was just too hard. So moderating the self, self-regulation, and balance. And I have never, I can say this, worked with somebody who didn't have an area of their life, that wasn't something that they could work on, whether it's in finance, because they spent too much, or they were so tight-fisted and frugal, in their parenting, in their partner, with their partner, in their work environment, in their home structure, the way that they live their life. And that all of that then is teaching people. And I've had so many, I'm aware that I don't want to be in a power struggle with people, but especially people that are highly successful. Liz was talking about working with entrepreneurs. For all of you, working with people who are highly successful. This idea of being balanced, of work-life balance, a huge piece of work. Oftentimes that is linked to this whole idea of being over control. The addictive personality, that person that, again, on the other side of that continuum, out of control. And so bringing people into that. This ties in with Jan this morning. We're helping people to be in their body and to really know the sense of moderating the self, and what that really looks like for people. Jan, anything you would want to add to that?
No, that's great.
All right. So for those of you that have,
Actually, there's one thing I would like to say about that. I just an example. Over the weekend, I did an intensive, and this woman grew up in a very shame-based family to begin with. Uh, she was the oldest of like 5 children, and it was all about being perfect. So both parents were very perfectionistic. So it's going to be all shame-based. And then on top of it, Julie, you'll appreciate this, Julie Richards. It was a very conservative Catholic um, belief that they had, and they belonged to some kind of cult that had to do with visions of Mother Mary, and they would scare all the girls and everyone in the family, the father would, with visions of dying and being raped, and their death is coming and all these things. And so then she had fear. So she was shame-based and completely fear-based, had no idea that that's the family she grew up in. And of course, whenever she would be struggling with any of her reality, the platitude or what the parents said is, read the Bible or whatever. And she had no joy or spontaneity in her life growing up. She's totally locked down. I mean, really, it's unbelievable how she presented, and just how sad that is that was really her whole life. And she really never really realized that until she came to the intensive. So that's a core issue 5 there. Her parents really were way over controlling.
well, and those, yes, examples of like that with, I think, with religious abuse, and really
Mhm.
struggling with that's a huge winner. Again, just the family out of all of that. And so being able to really talk about that's where I come back to, kind of us teaching and being present with people, and letting them, because their bodies are so shut down, and they're
She
so,
had a hard time, right? She had a hard time identifying emotions and identifying what's happening in her body. She'd say, maybe it's fear. I don't know. That's what she would say. So, you can just tell. And so that she was like a perfect example of really being shame-based as a family for perfectionism and then religious abuse. So anyway, just kind of an example of really, because I remember I used to think, wow, how could that really be shut down? But yes, it can be.
very much so. So then the sixth core issue, which is, again, is this new one that, as all of you know at this point, the idea of attachment is so important for us. So with the DART assessment, there are several questions in there that lead to a sense of attachment. So when we ask the question about what was happening when you were going to be entering the world, and people will say, well, I don't know. And then we'll say, we'll make that up. What was the thought of your mom, when you were born? What was that about your dad? How was the system? What did you remember? Where in birth order? So we think of this is the epigenetics. This is something, again, that we've talked about more the last couple of years. And a great book that I read a couple of years ago, that, again, if you're just adding things to your reading list, is that it didn't start with you. That just the idea of genetics that are passed on, generational, our genetic profile, our predisposition, some of us are more sensitive than others, and all of those factors that come into our life. Of course, then that's why we think systems wise that birth order matters, and where were we in that birth order, or were we the only child in the family? And then the family system, mom, dad, my 2 moms, the foster parents, I'm adopted, whatever that structure was within the system, that all of that is the formation of attachment. So now that, as we have introduced this as what we call the 6th core issue, is that when babies are born, they come into the world and they have a right, the birthright to have a sense of secure attachment, to have a good attachment. But, you know, the research, Jan and I talk about this one, is that 50 to 60% of people have a secure attachment. I think of it on that continuum. It seems a little high to me, and maybe I'm just skewed because of the work that I do. But I just think of the world that we live in. We're all imperfect in our parenting, but this understanding of attachment. And I want to read something to you that's taken from Janina Fisher, who's another teacher of mine that I've really grown to appreciate. But she says that human babies begin life with a very immature brain and body, sometimes struggling to keep up steady heartbeat and breathing. Because their nervous systems are so underdeveloped, they lack the capacity to eat, sleep, change positions, and regulate their emotional and physical states without round-the-clock help from their caretakers. So just pause there a second. That's all of us. That's all of our stories coming into the world. Ideally, during this stage of development, loving, attuned parents do more than help children by feeding them and keeping them to sustain positive feelings and teach them how to communicate their physical and interpersonal needs. Good attachment, that's Janina's word, teaches us that it is safe to be soothed by others and that it is safe to soothe ourselves. When loved ones are not available, even the child's ability to acquire new information, problem solve, and verbally communicate is dependent upon the quality of parental attachment. And so this idea of growing up in our families, we may not know about this early part of our life, but what I want to say to you is, as you're thinking about it, I want you to listen to your clients and reflecting on yourself now. Alan Shore, who's one of the big researchers, and his last name is Shoure. Alan Shore has a long, very academic talk. But if you're really interested in this from that standpoint, it's called The First 1,000 Days. And he really talks about this idea of those first 3 years of your life and how important they are. Now, do you have a explicit memory? I've worked with a few people that have had early explicit memory, but for most of us, it's that implicit body-based experience of distance. That's what we're looking at here with attachment and closeness and being a part of that. And so that as we are beginning to listen to people and think about it and talk about attachment, that's why we've added it is an important core issue to really understand. And as I said this morning, the good news is no matter what our attachment style is, that there's healing and hope. But the ways that we look at it is this anxious, ambivalent, that come here, go away, a lot of anxiety, but it's looking to that other for our self-soothing versus growing up with that avoidant, dismissive type of family where that you've, again, on your own, that would be your anti-dependent, growing up in that, the idea of to be close, to be connected is dangerous. And so I'm going to avoid that. And then the disorganized, the idea of a combined type, that I had some of the come here, go away, anxious, ambivalent, avoidant. I had all of that. And that's where then that comes in from that disorganized. And because I believe that all of these things, again, are not locked in stone, and it's a journey of life, that we land somewhere on that. So we can have a secure attachment with one parent, and we can have an avoidant attachment with another parent. We can have grown up in a certain type of system. And again, around these structures that we came from. And so we want to understand, because that's what shows up is that idea of relational challenges, the way that we are. We look to that other person. It's difficult for us, or we go back and forth. This again is where we pull this out from core issue 4 and now call this connecting the self to others. So this work lends itself to me being connected to myself. And this is then where interdependence is established and developed. So I'm going to say, uh-oh, for many people. For those of you that are couples counselors, this is what you're paying attention to all the time. This idea of people being interconnected and the challenges that brings in their lives. And so as people work on this, as they practice all 6 of these, and they're able to move into this, especially with this one, I think of the first 5, they're loving themselves, generated from the inside out. They have protective boundaries, because if they're in relationship with somebody that is more anxious, ambivalent, avoidant, or disorganized, they know that's information about that other person, and they can be respectful and boundary. They know themselves, their authentic story, and where this triggers them. They're taking care of themselves. So I don't need that person to make me okay, or that I dismiss that person. I'm balanced in it, and then I'm able to be interdependent. So when we teach this 6th core issue, it's a beautiful combination of the previous 5 coming into this. That's how we're really able to be interdependent, again, starting with self and with others. So Jan, I'm right on time with this. Anything else you would want to add with that?
No, I mean, how we look at it, and what we put in the level 2 manual. No, I think it was level 1 manual, is we talk about, and this is where Pia's golden rules for people. This is, I never realized when she talked about those that it's really talking about interdependence. And when we then decided to break out attachment, how we connect to others, interdependence is just what it's all about. So this whole idea of the golden rules. So most of you know the 3 golden rules, but I'll just say them really quickly. So we do have a handout. The first one is do what you can do for yourself without asking for help. And if you need help, ask. So that's apparent. So if your leg's broken, you need to ask for help. If you're fine and you can do it yourself, then walk upstairs and get a glass of water and come downstairs. And that's always a challenge, because this idea is, because we're trying to figure out where the middle is. And, should I be, will you keep doing my laundry? No, I think it's time you do your own laundry. So it has to do with, when do I take on being take care of the need myself. So that's the first one. The second one is, don't say yes to avoid overextending yourself. So what really it's saying is that you need to be saying no. Don't say yes when you want to say no, to avoid overextending yourself. And we all know that overextending ourselves, when we say yes all the time, we're truly not being true to ourselves. We're being needless and wantless. And what it gets us into trouble is that we start getting resentful. And resentment is like toxic waste in a relationship. So it's essential to learn when you need to say no rather than saying yes all the time. And Pia's favorite line I always loved was, don't say yes and then walk away and make up that you're a victim. Meaning you said yes. And so get under it and get on with it. Don't start whining about it. And then the last one is, don't do for others what they can do for themselves. And, as a parent, that's always tricky, like when you start having your kids wash their laundry at 5. I met a client who was doing her own laundry at 5. That's a little really extreme, but, should you be doing your kids' laundry when they're in college? Absolutely not. So it's this whole thing about enabling people. And when Rick calls me on the phone and wants to know a technical question, I say, no, I think, Rick, you can find that question out.
I hate
so
that.
I hate when you do that,
Hate it.
but that's how it goes. I'm really being in service to you, Rick. It's
I
helping.
know.
Anyway, but those three golden rules, as simple as they may sound, are just really hard to practice if you're working with couples. Because men would always say, I can't say no, because if I say no to her, she'll get really angry with me. So I always say yes. And then I say, well, then what? Then it builds up all this resentment. What do you do with that? Well, it comes out how passive aggressively, whatever. So anyway, so we go into that a little bit more when we're teaching.
Okay.
So did you want me to show you the Philip Shaver
No,
picture?
what I want to do is if we can take a 10-minute break, because that's a lot, and then I'll come back. I'm going to talk a little bit more
Okay.
about attachment and just
Sounds great.
an application of it for all of you in your practices.
Okay. All right. So let's take a break and be back at 2012 to be exact.
Sure. Okay. And that way, if the group runs a little bit over.
Yeah, we'll have time.
All right. So as we've been developing this, and by the way, when we come to the end, I read over the chat because I can't multitask like that. I can't look at that and then look at this. So I loved all your comments and things you all said and some questions. So after the break, we can come back to those.
The questions.
And because we have some.
Also, I just wanted to say, I'm trying to wave to get your attention.
Okay.
Maybe you couldn't see it, but I put every file that everybody was asking about in there. So there's growing up in my family, and then there's the healing our core issues. There's 2 versions, and then there's a smaller version and a larger version. They're both PDFs or 3 PDFs, so you can send those off to Office Max. And also I put in the latest DART assessment. So
hey Jan,
that's all.
I think you direct message those to me. So
Oh,
I don't think
really?
I don't think they went to the group.
Okay, well, that is important to know. All right, I will send them to everybody because you might want to download these. So I'll send those again while Rick's doing his little presentation. Thank you.
And those were the 3 things I was going to say was the PDF and the assessment. And especially for those of you that haven't gotten the assessment in the last few years, I think you'll really appreciate the updates here on it. And the idea of thinking about this from the attachment lens, and I was even thinking about that because I've been immersed in today's presentation this week thinking about it, was on the second page. I mean, I know the darn thing well enough that where it talks about other adults in your life, a lot of times in intensive, you can't so much do this, but when you're doing this with individuals in your office, I'm spending more time with that because you're looking at, Lori, kind of like your question was, that the idea of secure attachment. Now we know that early part of attachment, but then we also, that's the nature of it, is if parents divorce at 6 or dad dies at 10, or all of those factors. And were there any people, that's what I've been looking at now, that provided secure attachment? And sometimes in that list of a grandparent, I had somebody this week earlier talking about a neighbor. It was really fascinating how the neighbors really provided some secure attachment for her. And that was just in the questionnaire, the DART assessment. So I'm just presenting that just to say that a lot of times how life goes, I didn't look at that as much as I do now. And that's why I'm sharing that with you. So I have been spending time thinking about attachment in all these different ways and reading different authors. And I am just, aware of, for some of you, you've spent a lot of time with this as well. So that these are just some things that I found, and then a couple of things particular. But I think this will be the last book I'll recommend today because I've given you more than enough, is the book by Gabor Mate. It came out last September. I highly recommend it, The Myth of Normal. I have it as show and tell here because it is, for those of you that have purchased it, it looks like a Bible. It is a big book. And I listened to it on Audible once. I'm slowly reading it now as an academic experience and re-listening to it. So for Rebecca and Allie and Kirsten, when I was coming, I think I told you guys this, when I came down in October to Tennessee, I had like 6 hours, and that really helped me to listen to a big chunk of it. So it's a book, if you do Audible, that you can listen to, though, like 10 minutes. I mean, I don't get a kickback from he or his son who co-wrote it with him. But it really does talk about it. He's a psychiatrist, if you're familiar with his work. In the realm of Hungry Ghosts was on addiction. It's so good. But this book really embodies our work. Like, if you read that, like, he talks about developmental trauma and how important it is to understand that. He links it to medical wellness, and he has a model himself. And like I said earlier, as I was hearing him lecture, this was in October, where I began to really think about this, and I just loved it, was the idea of it is in our attachment that we really begin, and our adapted selves, as I was talking about, but also our authentic self. And so that idea of separating that out, and that's where I got that from, was from his book, is that we're the author of our story. And how cool is that? Some of you have heard, my favorite quote right now is, "It's never too late to live the life you might have lived." If any of you are familiar with that quote. And the idea of, no matter where I've come from, and that's part of understanding assessment, is the idea of understanding that we can recover, we can heal. Any of these researchers talk about it. And of course, Sue Johnson, in her doctoral program began all of this, looking at it, and in her couples, and now she's has done individual, therapy around her attachment model as well. But I want to read you, Gabor, he has a chapter on attachment, and I just want to read you what he says. Attachment is defined by my colleague and previous co-author, the psychologist Dr. Gordon Neufeld, is the drive for closeness, proximity to others, in not only the physical, but the emotional sense as well. Its primary purpose is to facilitate either caretaking or being taken care of. So there's a reciprocal factor with attachment, that we understand it. And that's part of couples therapy, that idea of it. Its primary purpose, again, I'm going to read that again, is to facilitate either caretaking, we are nurturing of others, starting with our self-compassion and that work, understanding, and then in receiving as well, being taken care of. For mammals, it is indispensable for life. For the human infant, especially at birth, among the most immature, dependent, and helpless animals, and remaining that way for by far the longest period of time, the need for attachment is mandatory. So I just want to pause right there. I just want you all to just pause with that. So to think about your story and just be present right now. This idea, what he's saying is that this is just so critical. That's why Jan and I have added this as a sixth core issue. And if you have the myth of normal, this is page 105 in the book. But the idea of this is that without, an understanding of this, we will continue to struggle. And that's why with our individual, and especially with our couples work, I've read Sue's stuff. We have folks who've gone through our training and linked that to emotionally focused therapy. Jan has done some work around that as well. And so I just want to say, though, that I love that again is just the idea of it is mandatory. And again, that's the birthright. I'm doing it like that because I want you all to understand that. And that's what we've added that. There are 4 S's, and this is what we're going to talk about in our small groups a bit. We're going to be relational. We're such a big group. We did that one big check-in and ask everybody to be limited, but is that we're going to have a little bit of time. Jan's going to have half the group, but I'm going to have half the group. And we're just going to share relationally. Of course, you can use your boundary. But the 4 S's of attachment. So this is a new 3x5 card for me, kind of having it there on my desk and remembering it. But we can talk with people relationally about these things. So we can go through column 1, and especially once they've done their DART assessment and the questionnaire growing up in the family. And these are questions that we can just relationally, this is the talk therapy with the body-based work, with the experiential part of it. But these are the essence of attachment, is feeling safe. So growing up, and people have a sense of this. Did you feel safe in your family system? And so this is the complexity of all of it. Were you seen growing up? Did your parents know you? Did they value this? This goes back to core issue 1. Were you soothed? Which is, again, one of those questions that we ask, we reflect on. And that is when we ask the question about nurturing. That's where that factors into. It's like, were you soothed? Were you comforted? Not just as that baby, but as the 10-year-old when you fell off your bike, when you were 16 and broke up with your boyfriend. Was there comfort there in that? And did you feel secure? And one of the ways that you can do this is a somatic based one, and that you can just ask your clients to close their eyes, be present in their body, this work we're talking about, the sensations, and you can ask them these questions and have them just, this is free associating, this is part of the gestalt of it, that just say, okay, and you could do 1 per session. Okay, just close your eyes. And I just want you to get a sense, this is our experiential work, about, did you feel safe? And just slow them down and just have them be in their body. Like, I can feel that activation just thinking about that and knowing a lot of your stories. Were you seen? Let's talk about that. What are you noticing? Were you soothed? And then ultimately what you're going to ask them is, and this is their perception, and perception is reality. Were you secure? And what we know, again, thinking of the Likert scale, is that they can feel secure. They can say, oh, I felt secure, but I wasn't safe. Okay, well, let's look at the differential there. Let's understand that. Nope, I was not seen. Okay, what might that impact be? The lost child, neglect. I hid because it was dangerous to be seen. I'm just giving you examples of ways that growing up. And then again, this idea of security and having them explore it. But these are the 4 S's of attachment. And in all my reading, I usually try to tell you where I got that from. I can't tell you. Honestly, I dug through my stuff yesterday when I was reviewing my notes, and I was like, shoot. So it wasn't mine.
It's Dan Siegel.
Is that Dan?
Mm-hmm. It's
okay,
Dan,
thanks.
And his last one is The Power of Showing Up.
Oh, thanks, Julie, because that's funny, because I read it. You know what? That makes sense, because my neuro, I have his one book on that. So thank you, Julie. So, and he has a 5th one. I wrote him down as 4. So what did you say the 5th one was?
No, I didn't say there was a 5th. It's just called The Power of Showing Up.
The Power of Showing Up. Okay. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Because I was thinking, why didn't I write that down? Dan's in my stack of stuff. So Dan Siegel.
So that's ultimately what we keep saying, is the power of a parent showing up for their kids, rather than the other way around, which is what you see, or not even showing up. But, I think that's like the ultimate right there is, did a parent ever reach in? Did the child ever get seen? Did the child, all of those things. especially when we talk about emotional abuse, and their emotional needs, no parent reaching in, helping them navigate emotion, name emotion, how to give guidance, all of that. So anyway, I love that. Thanks,
And
Julie.
thank you, Julie, because I can, at the next break, I can go find it. I know, right? I know the book that I was reading, so I can give you the page. So with all of that said, and I lied, Jan, I'm taking longer than I thought with this attachment lecture, is that Philip Shaver is one of the researchers who Jan introduced me to, actually, and that he has a 2-hour, he's not near as academic as Alan Shore, but he gives, if you really want to spend 2 hours, this is his area of interest. And it's funny, his name is not known as well, but it's Philip Shaver, just like the shaver, Shaver. And on YouTube, you can Google him, and it's Perspectives from Attachment Theory. And you'll see it's a 2-hour talk, and it's really a great talk. And he is an academic, but it's very user friendly, and it starts with John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. It goes through attachment theory, and talks ultimately about Buddhism. And so it's very practical. So it's one of those where, I say that to all of you, and I know how busy you all are. So every now and then I'll do something like that. Like I endured Alan Shore's, and it was important, but this one will be much easier if you want to pick just one of those 2 lengthy YouTubes I gave you. So Philip developed, and Jan, you can put this up here, and this is in your handouts that Jan sent to you. This is his way of looking at it, because he looks at it from the terms of adult development. So he was doing this long before Sue Johnson was, in looking at relationally kind of the dynamics. And in the talk, that if you listen to that, he talks about his development of this. But this is something that you can have and also share with your clients. But this is the idea, and that's why I said that with this model and with looking at this, that you can look at the quadrant and understand. So again, I'm not going to just take another couple minutes with this, because I want to go to a small group and just kind of talk a bit in our small groups about growing up in our families in those 4 S's. But is that, again, if you look at this idea of, we've talked about the avoidance and the anxiety, the anxious attachments. So that secure attachment, you're able to engage and self-regulate. That's a big part of secure attachment, is that if people are close to you or distant, it does not have the impact on you. So it's that idea of proximity and separation. This is keeping it, really simple. And this idea then of the fearful, the anxious, ambivalent, again, that energy around that, and hyper, and it can go hypo without any modulating that kind of idea of that. And we could spend a lot of time with it, but this is a wonderful handout. So that's that across from that secure anxiety, high avoidance. So that's the way you look at that. Now, the low anxiety, the idea of that is the avoidant, because they've built the wall and they're separate. So they're hypersensitive to shame. Interesting, isn't it? So that's that self-protective response that brings the wall up. And then that, my eyesight, now I have to put on my glasses, is prevailing fear of emotional overwhelm. So Shane, you said in there that you were feeling overwhelmed. I appreciated that when you said that, learning all this new information or being reminded of stuff, that's what we do. We shut down, we overwhelm and go into dorsal vagal. Stuck in hypoarousal, over-reliance on auto-regulation, dismissing of others, for those of us that have avoidance style, focusing on themselves. And then the preoccupied anxious attachment, then the ultimate is that, and I read those wrong because I didn't have my glasses on, sorry about that. I read the disorganized first, was the preoccupied attachment, is that idea of the hypersensitive and then looking to the other person. with a feeling of abandonment, stuff in hyper arousal, over reliance in this need, and anxious in this regard. So I apologize, my humanity, of course, you three, when I read the disorganized because I didn't have my glasses on. So the idea of this quadrant is helping people to understand how we can move in and out of things and the idea of it. So Jan, you want to add anything to that one?
No.
Okay. So Patty's gonna send us into the mystery of Zoom and the magic of Zoom. And we're gonna be in 2 small groups. And we're gonna talk about those 4 S's and your family system.